Imagine this. You're deep underground, the weight of the earth pressing down on you. Every breath is shallow, every movement is strained. The air is thick, suffocating, as you squeeze through tight, jagged passages that seem to close in with every step you take. But it's not the darkness or the claustrophobia that makes this place terrifying. It's the fact that you know, deep down, something has gone horribly wrong and there's no way out. Welcome to Nutty Putty Cave, a place that's far from the adventurous thrill seekers imagine it to be. For most, it's an escape, a challenge. But for one man, this cave would become his eternal prison, a place where time stood still and death slowly closed in. In the fall of 2009, John Edward Jones, a 26-year-old medical student, set off to explore the cave with his brother and friends. What started as a simple caving trip quickly turned into something far darker. John, eager to conquer the challenge, crawled into a tight, uncharted passageway that, unbeknownst to him, would trap him in a nightmare where rescue would be impossible. Picture this: a man, upside down, wedged so tightly in the earth that even the strongest, most skilled rescuers would struggle to reach him. His body trapped, his lungs filling with the fear of knowing that with every passing hour, his chances of survival slipped further away. But this was no ordinary rescue. No, this was a race against time, against gravity, and against the cave itself, a place where, sometimes, the earth just doesn't let go. Nutty Putty Cave, its very name almost sounds like an invitation, a playful, harmless moniker for a place so dangerous it could only be fully understood by those brave yet foolish enough to venture inside. Located in the barren Utah desert, the cave was, for decades, a hidden gem for adventurers, a labyrinth of narrow, winding tunnels. It promised excitement, mystery, and the thrill of the unknown. Discovered in 1960, the cave's narrow passages and tight squeezes became a magnet for thrill seekers. Unlike the intimidating entrances of other caves, Nutty Putty seemed to welcome those who dared to enter, offering a playground of rock and earth. People flocked from all around, eager to experience what many called one of the most fascinating caves in the United States. It was a place where you could crawl through cracks and crevices, squeeze through tunnels so tight you'd feel the walls pressing against your chest. For most, it was an exhilarating adventure, but few knew that this innocent-looking cave hid a darker, more sinister side. What was it that kept people coming back, even after stories of close calls? Was it the thrill of pushing the limits of human endurance, the sense of conquering the unknown, or perhaps it was the belief that as long as you followed the right path, you'd always make it out safely? But what if the cave had a darker plan for those who dared to venture too far? Despite a handful of warning signs over the years, Nutty Putty remained open to explorers. Stories of close calls and rescue operations were brushed off, forgotten by the next generation of adventurers who entered the cave with only the bravado of youth and the false sense of security that comes with familiarity. It was easy to believe that the worst was behind them after all. If others made it out unscathed, why wouldn't they? The cave seemed harmless, even inviting, until one fateful day. That day would come in November 2009. John Jones, a medical student with a passion for caving, would soon discover that what seemed like an ordinary cave expedition was about to spiral into a nightmare from which there would be no escape. But what was it about Nutty Putty that made it so irresistible? What was its draw for John and his group of friends? John was no stranger to caves. He had explored many before, but on this particular day, he was joined by his brother and a few close friends. They had heard of Nutty Putty's tight squeezes and winding tunnels, and like many before them, they believed they could conquer whatever lay beneath the earth. They were wrong. As they made their way through the entrance, passing through the wide, safe chambers of the cave, no one could have foreseen the horrific turn their trip would take. But Nutty Putty had its own set of rules that would become painfully clear once John ventured too far and made one fatal mistake. John and his group navigated through the familiar parts of the cave, laughing and joking, enjoying the thrill of exploration. The birth canal, one of the cave's most notorious passages, was their next destination. It was a narrow, twisting tunnel that challenged even the most experienced spelunkers. But to John, it was just another obstacle to conquer. What he didn't know was that this wasn't the only challenge awaiting him. But then came the decision that would change everything. In a split second, John veered off the main path and entered an unknown, unmapped section of the cave. It was here, in this uncharted space, that he would find himself trapped, unable to move, unable to escape, his fate sealed by a cave that had patiently been waiting for the right moment. John Edward Jones was no stranger to challenges. At 26 years old, He had already conquered much in his life. A bright, driven medical student, he had always pushed the boundaries of his own capabilities. His passion for exploration matched his ambition, whether it was hiking through rugged terrain or studying for exams. John never backed down from an opportunity to prove himself. He was the kind of person who believed in living life to the fullest, always seeking the next thrill, the next adventure. For John, Nutty Putty Cave wasn't just a dangerous hole in the earth, it was an opportunity to test his limits. He wasn't naive, he knew the risks involved, but his years of outdoor experience and his careful, thoughtful nature gave him confidence. He had spent countless hours reading about cave systems and learning about the science behind the structures that made them so fascinating. John knew how to navigate difficult terrain, how to move carefully, how to use his skills to stay safe in the wild. So, when he set out on that fateful day with his brother and friends, there was no doubt in his mind that they would have a fun, memorable adventure. But there's something about caves that's impossible to fully comprehend until you're standing at the entrance, looking into the dark expanse. Even the most experienced spelunkers can feel a chill run down their spine when they face the claustrophobic, suffocating passageways. No matter how much you prepare, you're never truly in control. And this realization is what John would face soon enough. As they made their way through the familiar, open passages, John's excitement grew. The group was joking and laughing, their voices echoing off the cave walls as they prepared to venture deeper into the labyrinth. It was everything they had imagined, the thrill of exploration, the joy of discovery, the camaraderie of friends and family sharing the moment. But deep down there was a nagging feeling that something was different this time, a feeling that something wasn't quite right. It started when John veered off the main path, choosing to crawl into a narrower section of the cave. At first, it didn't seem like a big decision, just a small diversion, a chance to see something that few others had witnessed. But what John didn't realize was that this narrow passage, this seemingly harmless crack in the rock, was leading him somewhere far darker. He had entered an unmapped section of the cave, a place no one had explored in years, a place where the rocks were more treacherous, the space tighter, the danger far more immediate. The birth canal was supposed to be the challenge, but it wasn't this narrow, twisted fissure. This new path, so tight and constricting, was unknown territory, a place that would prove to be far more unforgiving than anything John could have imagined. And when he crawled deeper, his body wedged between two massive slabs of rock, it became immediately clear that he was stuck. The panic started slowly, creeping in like a shadow, but the more he struggled, the more trapped he became. His legs, tangled in the rocks, were pinned in place. His body was contorted in ways that should never have been possible. His arms, once able to reach out and move freely, were now useless against the unforgiving stone. The air around him grew thick, heavy with the smell of damp earth and the oppressive silence of the cave. It was a feeling he hadn't anticipated, an overwhelming sense of helplessness. There, in the tight, suffocating space, John was truly at the mercy of the cave. He could hear his breath, shallow and desperate, as he realized the gravity of his situation. It was like a horrible dreamer nightmare where every movement only seemed to make things worse. The walls of the cave, once an exciting challenge, now felt like they were closing in on him. The weight of the earth was pressing down on him, and there was no way to break free. No matter how hard he tried, no matter how much he pushed, he couldn't escape. As the minutes stretched into hours, John's thoughts turned from excitement to fear. It wasn't just the physical strain, it was the growing realization that no one could reach him. His friends, his brother, could only watch in helpless horror. The cave, it seemed, had decided that John's journey would end here, and no one had the power to stop it. In the depths of Nutty Putty Cave, John was no longer an adventurer. He was a victim of his own curiosity, trapped in a tomb of rock that had no intention of letting him go. As John lay suspended in that nightmarish position, trapped in the suffocating grip of Nutty Putty Cave, the reality of his situation slowly began to sink in. He had always prided himself on being prepared, on taking the right steps to ensure his safety. But now, it didn't matter. The passage had turned against him, and every breath he took felt more desperate than the last. His mind raced, heart pounding as he tried to move his legs, shift his body, anything to free himself from the rock that had him locked in place. But the more he struggled, the more impossible the task seemed. Every inch he tried to move, every shift in his body, only tightened the hold the cave had on him. His feet were wedged so tightly that they might as well have been part of the rock itself. He was completely inverted, unable to right himself, unable to find any comfortable position. Time, which had once seemed infinite and full of promise, now seemed to stretch endlessly before him. Hours dragged on as John lay trapped, helpless, and beginning to panic. His thoughts turned to his friends and family. How long would it take for them to realize he was in trouble? Would they be able to find him in time? The longer he remained stuck, the more hopeless it seemed. Even if they did find him, how would they get him out? The thought that he might never see the world above ground again began to settle heavily in his chest. But this wasn't a situation anyone could easily prepare for. The narrow, twisting passage he had crawled into wasn't just a tight squeeze-ite, was a death trap. The opening was so small, so cramped, that even the most experienced cave rescuers would find it near impossible to extract a person from it. John's decision to veer off the main path and explore this unmapped section was, in hindsight, a fatal one. But at the time, it had seemed like just another adventurous challenge, another opportunity to experience something that few others had. What he hadn't known was that this crack in the rock was not meant to be navigated by any human body, no matter how skilled. As the hours passed, John's thoughts turned darker. He was beginning to realize that help wasn't coming as quickly as he had hoped. His body ached, the numbness spreading from his legs to his torso. The cold stone pressed against his skin, and the air around him grew thinner with every passing minute. He could hear the faint sound of his friends and brother calling out to him from above, but their voices seemed so far away, swallowed by the unrelenting silence of the cave. At this point, there was no way out. Every move, every attempt to shift his body only pushed him further into the rock's suffocating grip. And then, the desperation set in. A part of him began to accept the horrifying reality. He was trapped utterly and completely. He began to wonder how long he could hold on, how much longer his body could endure the strain. Would he be found in time, or was this going to be his final resting place? The panic and the pain were unbearable, but there was nothing he could do. The cave, as it had claimed so many before him, was claiming him now, and no matter how hard John tried to escape, it was clear that Nutty Putty Cave had already decided that his journey was over. He was nothing more than a lost soul, ensnared in the earth, and with every passing second, his chances of survival seemed to slip further and further away. In that moment, the fatal mistake that had led him into this inescapable situation felt all-encompassing. It wasn't just the narrowness of the passage that had trapped him, it was his own belief that he could navigate it, conquer it, like so many challenges before. But sometimes, even the bravest, most prepared souls are no match for the relentless power of the earth beneath their feet. The moment John realized the full extent of his predicament, the hours began to feel like days. Each minute stretched longer than the last, the weight of his situation sinking deeper. But in the world above, unaware of the true severity of John's plight, his friends and brother were still trying to come up with a solution. The panic was beginning to creep into their voices as they scrambled to reach him, unaware of just how dire things had become. It wasn't until John's brother, Josh, and the others reached the point where they last saw him before he veered off into the narrow passage that they realized the danger. The moment Josh called out, receiving no answer, the group knew something had gone terribly wrong. What had started as an exciting exploration now turned into a frantic search. They shouted, calling his name, but the only sound that echoed back was the ominous stillness of the cave. And then, the moment came the realization that John was trapped, and they had to act fast. A small group of rescuers arrived, their initial thoughts filled with hope and confidence. After all, this wasn't the first time someone had gotten stuck in the cave, but this time, it was different. This time, the passage John had chosen was far narrower, far more complex, and the risks of extraction were immense. At first, the rescue teams believed that they would be able to free John within hours. With the right ropes, tools, and expertise, they thought they could pull him free. But what seemed like a routine rescue quickly devolved into a harrowing struggle as the rescuers began to understand the magnitude of the challenge they were facing. The passage where John was trapped was so tight, it left barely enough room to maneuver a hand, let alone rescue equipment. Every attempt to reach him required more precision, more care, but time was running out. The longer John remained stuck, the more his chances of survival dwindled. Each attempt to free him only seemed to make matters worse. It wasn't long before the rescuers realized that they couldn't simply pull him free. The passage was too narrow, the rock too unforgiving. The team scrambled to find other solutions, drilling, cutting, anything to create more space and to free John. But the cave, as if alive alive with its own twisted will, resisted every effort. Hours stretched into a full day. The tension grew, but John's situation remained unchanged. He was still trapped, still unable to move, his body becoming more exhausted and strained with every passing minute. The rescuers were in uncharted territory, physically and mentally drained. The strain of the situation took its toll on them too. They too were fighting against the clock, hoping for a miracle, praying that they could somehow save John before it was too late. And still, they were faced with the brutal reality this was no ordinary rescue. Nutty Putty Cave had become a deadly trap, and the chances of freeing John without risking even more lives were growing slimmer by the second. But as hours passed and the situation grew even more dire, something darker began to emerge. The reality was sinking in. The cave was not going to release John. The earth had claimed him, and it wasn't about to let go. The rescue teams, although committed and determined, were now fighting against a force they couldn't control. Every hour that passed felt like an eternity. They had done everything they could, but no amount of planning, no amount of courage would be enough to bring John back. The cave had already claimed him, and in the end, there was nothing anyone could do to change that grim fact. The moment John realized the full extent of his predicament, the hours began to feel like days. Each minute stretched longer than the last, the weight of his situation sinking deeper. But in the world above, unaware of the true severity of John's plight, his friends and brother were still trying to come up with a solution. The panic was beginning to creep into their voices as they scrambled to reach him, unaware of just how dire things had become. It wasn't until John's brother, Josh, and the others reached the point where they last saw him before he veered off into the narrow passage that they realized the danger. The moment Josh called out, receiving no answer, the group knew something had gone terribly wrong. What had started as an exciting exploration now turned into a frantic search. They shouted, calling his name, but the only sound that echoed back was the ominous stillness of the cave. And then, the moment came the realization that John was trapped, and they had to act fast. A small group of rescuers arrived, their initial thoughts filled with hope and confidence. After all, this wasn't the first time someone had gotten stuck in the cave, but this time, it was different. This time, the passage John had chosen was far narrower, far more complex, and the risks of extraction were immense. At first, the rescue teams believed that they would be able to free John within hours. With the right ropes, tools, and expertise, they thought they could pull him free. But what seemed like a routine rescue quickly devolved into a harrowing struggle as the rescuers began to understand the magnitude of the challenge they were facing. The passage where John was trapped was so tight, it left barely enough room to maneuver a hand, let alone rescue equipment. Every attempt to reach him required more precision, more care, but time was running out. The longer John remained stuck, the more his chances of survival dwindled. Each attempt to free him only seemed to make matters worse. It wasn't long before the rescuers realized that they couldn't simply pull him free. The passage was too narrow, the rock too unforgiving. The team scrambled to find other solutions, drilling, cutting, anything to create more space and to free John. But the cave, as if alive with its own twisted will, resisted every effort. Hours stretched into a full day. The tension grew, but John's situation remained unchanged. He was still trapped, still unable to move, his body becoming more exhausted and strained with every passing minute. The rescuers were in uncharted territory, physically and mentally drained. The strain of the situation took its toll on them too. They too were fighting against the clock, hoping for a miracle, praying that they could somehow save John before it was too late. And still, they were faced with the brutal reality this was no ordinary rescue. Nutty Putty Cave had become a deadly trap, and the chances of freeing John without risking even more lives were growing slimmer by the second. But as hours passed and the situation grew even more dire, something darker began to emerge. The reality was sinking in. The cave was not going to release John. The earth had claimed him, and it wasn't about to let go. The rescue teams, although committed and determined, were now fighting against a force they couldn't control. Every hour that passed felt like an eternity. They had done everything they could, but no amount of planning, no amount of courage would be enough to bring John back. The cave had already claimed him, and in the end, there was nothing anyone could do to change that grim fact. As the hours turned into a full day, hope began to erode. The relentless efforts of the rescue teams, who had worked tirelessly without sleep, were slowly overshadowed by the crushing reality that John might not survive this. The cave, so inviting to adventurers at first, had turned its back on him, and no amount of skill, expertise, or determination could alter its grip. It was as if the earth itself had made its decision. John was too far gone, trapped in a space so narrow, so confining, that even the most advanced rescue techniques could not reach him. Every time the rescuers thought they had a breakthrough, another obstacle would appear, making the task more impossible. They drilled into the rock, trying to loosen the passage, and used ropes and pulleys to try to extract him. But the weight of the earth pressed down in ways they couldn't overcome. With each failed attempt, the situation became more and more desperate. John's friends and family watched as the hours passed, unable to do anything but wait. The cave that had once promised excitement and adventure now felt like a cold, indifferent tomb, swallowing him whole. Every attempt to free him seemed to only entrench him deeper into the earth. By the second day, the rescuers had no choice but to accept the grim truth. John's body was still trapped in the same unyielding position, and there was no feasible way to pull him out alive. His body, having endured such intense pressure and strain, could no longer be moved without risking further harm. The narrow fissure he was stuck in had become a tomb in which John's life slowly slipped away. The decision was made to halt the rescue efforts, for fear that continuing would put even more lives at risk. With a heavy heart, the teams were forced to stop. The cave had claimed John as its own, and there was no way to retrieve him. The idea of leaving his body behind was unbearable, but the risks of further attempts made it clear that not even the strongest forces could overcome the overwhelming power of Nutty Putty. And so, after 28 hours, the rescue operation was officially called off. It was a bitter decision, one that weighed heavily on everyone involved. John had been just an arm's length away from freedom, but the cave had swallowed him whole, a silent and unforgiving beast. His body remained where it had been, trapped in the cold rock, with no one able to retrieve it. The cave, once an inviting playground for adventurers, would forever hold John's memory within its depths. The entrance to Nutty Putty was sealed, not just to prevent further tragedy, but as a solemn tribute to the man who had entered with hope and excitement, only to be swallowed by a place that had no mercy. The rock that had claimed John remained unchanged, cold and indifferent to the horror that had unfolded within. John's story became a chilling reminder to everyone who ventured into the unknown. Some places, some experiences should remain untouched, and sometimes, no matter how carefully you plan, you cannot escape the pull of a fate that has already been decided. Nutty Putty Cave, forever sealed, would forever carry the weight of John's final resting place, a haunting, silent memorial to a life lost too soon. Today, Nutty Putty Cave stands sealed, its depths holding a chilling reminder of the fragile line between adventure and tragedy. John Jones' story serves as a haunting lesson. The earth has its own way of keeping secrets, and sometimes the price of discovery is too high. If you found this story haunting, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more real-life tales that delve into the darkest corners of history. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let us know which story you'd like us to explore next. Stay curious, stay cautious, and remember, some stories are better left untold.